Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second to last presentation of day 2 of the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness Summit, or the C3EB Summit. For those of you who have hung on, we are almost 2/3 of the way there. We have just one more day to go. You've gone through over 40 hours of content in 3 days. So if your mind is blown, I absolutely do not blame you. If your mind is not blown, what are you doing wrong? So with that being said, get ready, get present for this presentation because it is going to be absolutely critical because Dalia Kinsey is here to talk to us about our relationship with food and what inclusive nutrition programming and education takes. This is a very important conversation, especially right now, especially as we are going into an election year with policies that are going to determine our futures about many of these nutritional issues and food issues and just our future as the American society. So this is a very, very important conversation to be a part of. So whether you're joining in live or whether you're joining in later, make sure you drop your questions in the comments so that I can get them directly to Dalia and she can answer your questions directly. We need to make sure that you are getting the right information on this because it is that critical. So make sure you comment. If you want to get in touch with Dalia directly, you see the scrolling ticker on the bottom. You can connect with Dalia through her website at daliakinsey.com, and she has some free resources for you to get you started. So make sure you do that. Couple of housekeeping notes before I officially introduce Dalia and hand off the stage to her. I hope you're tuning in on YouTube or Facebook via the C3EB Summit channel. Drop your comments there, and of course, make sure you subscribe, like the C3EB Facebook page, and give us your feedback. Yes, give us your feedback about all the technical difficulties you've seen us go through today. Those are going to help us improve, but also please let us know how much you've enjoyed Dalia's conversation because that's going to be helpful for her as well to develop future programming that serves your needs instead of going off of assumptions. So that's very critical. Feedback is very critical. Last thing, this would not be possible without our partners and sponsors. So a huge thank you to Essential IT, our web team, Defy the Status Quo Marketing, our content specialist, Zanzibar Enterprises, and the Nielsen Company for walking this walk with us toward equity, toward belongingness, and toward intentional inclusion. Thank you so much for believing in our dream to make this summit possible and all of our future programming possible. Without further ado, let me tell you about Dalia Kinsey and why I personally reached out to her, borderline stalked her, and got her to agree to this. Dalia, don't laugh. Dalia Kinsey, RD, LD, SNS, she's going to explain all of those to you, is the founder at Black Joy Summit. She is an inclusive job site wellness specialist and health at every size registered dietitian on a mission to make health accessible to all by encouraging body respect and joyful movement. Dalia worked in public health for years prior to moving to K through 12, where she manages nutrition education and job site wellness for a medium-sized district. This year, she created the Black Joy Summit to serve as a virtual wellness tool to support Black Americans coping with high levels of stress in response to systemic racism. That's just a nutshell of why I vetted Dalia and asked her to be a speaker, and I'm so glad she agreed to be a speaker. But you're going to find out more about her and her programming and why she is such a powerful and critical voice in this greater movement for equity, belongingness, and intentional inclusion. That being said, Dalia, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction.
Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to do this. The stage is all yours. Take it away.
All right. I am glad to be here, and I hope that everyone is still feeling fairly energized. I know it's been a long day, but I really want for this presentation to be interactive. So please put your comments in the chat so that we can have a little bit of back and forth. this is something that really requires us to be introspective. And that is a thing that I am noticing as people's awareness of some of the deficits we have in our organizations and in different, professional organizations regarding equity and inclusion. People keep approaching it as though this is something we're going to study and we're going to master it. And at the end of a class, we're going to be anti-racist for life. When in reality, this is an ongoing process. We have all been steeped in a white supremacist, homophobic soup for most of our lives. There's no reason to believe that we haven't imbibed some of that poison. Even if you are a marginalized person, even if you are a person of color, even if you are a Black person, all the time we see evidence of internalized white supremacy. So if Black people are not exempt from all the negative messaging we hear as a nation about Black people, then obviously no one is exempt. So that is a very common thing, to internalize negative messaging when it is ever present. So let's just accept that this is an ongoing process and perfection is not required. One, perfection is not possible. And two, if we approach this like, oh, if I study enough, I'm going to get it right and I'm never going to say anything wrong again, you'll be very discouraged when you realize that no matter how much work you do, we're never done. The biggest room in the world is room for improvement. But if we look at this from a growth mindset, that isn't discouraging. It's just part of life. We need to learn to enjoy learning and growing and not see signs that we still need to keep changing as a sign of defeat, because it's not. It's a process. So that's the first thing I want for us to accept and acknowledge. So I have 10 things I want for us to look at for approaching, making sure that our content is affirming and acknowledging everyone in our audience. So the nutrition and wellness fields are known to be exclusionary. And in a lot of ways, that's intentional. The marketing is kind of aspirational, and most companies want for the mythical ideal to seem just a little out of our reach so that we'll continue buying products and striving for, things that we probably will never obtain. Even when marketing is targeted at cisgendered, fairly thin white women, that is still the goal. So you're presented with images of women that are abnormally thin. And by abnormally, I mean in comparison to the general population, the sizes that you see on the media in advertisements in relation to health promotion are far below what the average person weighs in this country. That is all intentional. If you are working in a public health space, in healthcare, or in some other wellness space where your objective is really and truly to improve the health outcomes of people, we have to make sure that we're not operating under the influence of what is standard in those types of health and fitness spaces. Because there, the goal is really, it's all about the bottom line. It isn't about healing. And I'm not even going to touch on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's neither here nor there. It's simply a fact. When you are in that space, the goal is to generate a little bit of dependence in between the customer and yourself so that they continually come back to you for more guidance. When you're working in public health, the goal is to give people the tools they need to be self-sufficient so that they can thrive in your absence and so that they can change the community around them in a positive way. Health is really the foundation for everything. And while being healthy is not an obligation, and of course what the client wants is paramount, for people who do desire health and who do want to live as fully and as possible in the body that they're in, being well nourished and being physically active, we have to make sure that when we create content, we're making room for everyone. So we're going to go over 10 things for you to think about, and remember to download the resource guide because our biases are so deeply entrenched. Like I said, this is going to take more than a day. So you want to make sure you get those resources and continue to dig deeper. And then some of these resources are practical hands-on things that you will actually want to use, like tools. So make sure you get the guide. Number 1, focus on your audience. And that seems intuitive, but far too often, even myself, I experience this as a dietitian when I go to conferences, when I go to different trainings, even when I can see the speaker will make comments that make it sound as though there are no Black people in the room. Really focus on the reality of your audience. If there are Black people in the room, and you start talking about all the statistics that reveal Black people are just undereducated and don't know how to feed themselves, and oh, we just got to get out there and help these poor undereducated people of color. While there are educated people of color in the room, I need for you to think about what that experience must be like, how invalidating that is. And if you are a person who's there for information, what you have just communicated is, I'm invisible, I'm not important as an attendee, and that not only did you not plan on me being there or anybody who looked like me, even when you saw me, you didn't think about what my experience of that statement would be. When we create content that doesn't affirm and acknowledge the identities of everyone in the audience, not only does it make our presentations ineffective for those people who aren't feeling seen, it actually can do a lot of damage, which is the exact opposite of our goal. So much research is out there about the damage that stress does to the body. Systemic oppression is experienced as stress. So many of the health disparities that we see can be explained by that stress. Even though people like to focus on body weight and lifestyle choices, sure, those are factors, but health is multifactorial. The stress of microaggressions, the stress of being ignored, the stress of being invalidated, of being told, yes, you paid to be here. Yes, you paid for guidance and a wellness program that's going to help you move forward towards your fitness goals. But it doesn't matter that I have your money. You are not important enough for me to create content that acknowledges your existence in my audience. The damage that that does to the person that you were paid to help, it's reprehensible that we don't address this more often. And it isn't a personal failing, so absolutely don't internalize that or feel guilty. This is a systemic issue. This is a chronic issue across the board. We see it all over healthcare, that people do not get validation or culturally appropriate counseling when they pay for healthcare. So all other things being equal, if a white woman goes in for healthcare, maternal healthcare, her health outcomes will be better when we just look at the stats than someone else of the exact same income bracket with the exact same amount of coverage if that person is a person of color. People are not getting equal care regardless of what they're paying. And it's getting to a point that the consumer is pretty fed up with this, and we're definitely in a time of shift. So not only is it morally reprehensible to not offer people the same quality of service, not only is it really a disaster from a public health perspective to not give people of diverse identities the treatment and attention that they need to thrive, it's coming to a point where it is going to affect the bottom line because people are not going to continue to accept treatment that should be helpful that actually harms them. So there's a lot of reasons why we should be very invested in this. So focus on your audience and try to see things from the perspective of a variety of types of listeners when you're going through your content. And this brings me to the second point. Of course, you can't fully know what someone else's experience is like. That's why you need to bring a variety of people to the decision-making table. You cannot create content, you cannot create a program that is truly inclusive without input from other people. And if you are a small operation, if you are a solopreneur, if you're a small counseling firm, this doesn't necessarily mean you need to hire a bunch of people with diverse perspectives. It could simply mean you need to extend your personal network to a diverse variety of people so that when you want to run an idea by someone, you have someone you can talk to. And you don't want this to be a really one-sided relationship where you are exploiting or taking advantage or sucking up the emotional energy of a marginalized person for your own benefit. What you want to do is make it clear what your objective is and make sure that this is a relationship that that person would like to engage in. Maybe there's something mutually beneficial that you could do. Maybe there's some work exchange that you could do. Is there something that they need that you specialize in? Just make it clear what you're looking for and put it out there. Whether or not you have the budget to hire a consultant specifically for this, you can find other solutions. But if you do have the budget to hire a consultant for this, or if you could reallocate some funds, that is the preferred thing to do. It is very common for people to ask people of color to labor for free. And that really needs to stop. It's very problematic. When we think about equity, if we know that some marginalized populations have to do twice as much or really break their back because they don't have access to generational wealth to really thrive, it's not very nice to ask that same group of people to labor for free, saying, oh, well, this is to help your community, so of course you should be willing to do it as a volunteer. Time costs. So when you think about opportunity costs, please compensate people for their time. But the benefit that you will get if you form a diverse team that reviews your content is tremendous. So, number one, you're focusing on your audience. Number two, you've brought diverse people onto your team to help you review your content. And when I say diverse, that doesn't just mean people with different colors. No, that means age diversity. Think about ableism. Think about hard of hearing people. Think about blind people. All of the different types of people who may need special accommodations to really enjoy the materials that you're offering. So, number three, when you step into the shoes of the audience member, looking at your content, and this is the section that maybe you do alone, think about whether or not anything you have said would not apply to someone of the opposite gender, or would not apply to someone who's non-binary, or would not apply to someone who doesn't hold the same religious beliefs as you. Think about who might read that sentence, hear that sentence, and say, yeah, I totally can't relate. So, perfect example, just a couple of days ago in an interview with someone who has really dedicated their professional life to diversity and inclusion, made a statement about having never known, saying that all of us as a nation are discovering that interactions with the police are sometimes negative and unpredictable. And they stated it in such a way like, yeah, we all are just finding this out. No, that's not the case. It is not news to me. It is not news to Black America in general. In a conversation, that's not a problem because you can go back and forth. And naturally, it comes out like, oh, yeah, I totally don't relate to that statement. That doesn't apply to me. And then immediately in the conversation, the person can correct, and say, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't mean to invalidate your experience or to forget that we haven't all had the same lived experience. Perfectly fine in a conversation. If that was a presentation, think about how many people in the audience might have felt alienated by that, might have felt like, oh, well, you just said everybody. Does that mean I don't belong here? Does that mean I'm kind of like a guest here? Because that's totally not my experience. Did you forget about me? Hello, I'm over here. So that's really kind of connected to the focusing on your audience, but a little bit deeper. Try and really think, does this apply to everyone? Is there a way I can rephrase this and make it more neutral? Or you can acknowledge that this is from your particular perspective, that not everyone's experience is the same. So the goal is not for you to magically suddenly know what everyone thinks and what everyone has lived through. It's more about making sure that the way you phrase it acknowledges that there are a number of different lived experiences in the room. And of course, that's something you can dig deeper with your team on. So, number 2, number 4. I started out saying that perfection is not possible, but that doesn't stop a lot of us from desperately wanting it. That fear of being criticized, that fear of being wrong, the shame that a lot of us experience when we're caught making a mistake, which is kind of a silly way to see it, because how are you caught? You're human. All humans do is strive to be better and make mistakes. Like, that's literally part of the human condition. How are you being caught doing something that is absolutely natural? Just work on learning how to feel when that is what's coming up for you. When you're feeling shame around something that's natural and normal, and when you're allowing that fear to stop you from being more inclusive, because that is another reaction that some of us have when we're trying to avoid being caught making mistakes. We will just give up on it altogether. Well, if I don't try, I can't get it wrong. That isn't the way to approach this. And it just has such a negative effect on your audience. Even when you look at someone and you imagine that you have the same lived experience, you literally have no way of knowing whether or not that's true. So let's say you say, you know what, I'm just going to keep making my content for cisgendered, heterosexual, white, straight-haired people who make $100,000 a year and above. Those are my people. That's my target. Okay, let's say that that's your target demo. You have no way of knowing whether or not, from looking at a client, whether or not they really are cis. You don't know that. You don't know whether or not they're straight. You don't know whether or not they grew up in an impoverished background. You don't know whether or not they're biracial. You cannot look at someone and assess their marginalized identity. So if you decide to just give up on trying to be inclusive because you're afraid of making mistakes, it's not going to work. Just accept that perfection is not possible, but it's not necessary. You just need to make a sincere and consistent effort to keep improving, to expose yourself to a variety of input so that people can hold up a mirror to you and let you know when you've missed something. I know I myself recently realized that all of this time I should have on my website been creating descriptions of images. My website was not accessible to people who are not able to see. That is something that will be easy for me to correct. I'm in the process of correcting it now, and I have a resource in the guide that will also help you do that. There are a lot of organizations out there that have created content specifically to help the marginalized populations they serve with accessibility. So if you don't know what you need to do to make your website accessible to the blind, don't worry, there's a website for that. If you don't know what you need to do to make your website accessible to people who are hard of hearing, Also, there are a lot of resources to help you with that. The biggest issue is not being aware that you need to make a change. So now that you're hearing it and you are aware, problem solved. We are on our way to the solution. The next thing you want to think about is avoiding gendered language. This year in particular, we're really seeing a push. So many people who are cis are identifying their pronouns all over social media. It's getting to that point where being clueless about the fact that not everybody is going by he and she these days, that's not going to work anymore. We need to learn people's pronouns. And one thing I have learned, a lot of non-binary people, a lot of trans people would just say, these are my pronouns. Not that I prefer them, but they literally are mine. I would never say that I prefer she, her. I just feel like I am a she, her. So one thing you can do is try to avoid gendered language altogether. So instead of saying, hey, ladies, when you present to a room that is full of femme identifying people or femme presenting people, you may just want to say, hi, friends. Hello, everyone. And if you're in the South, hey, y'all, that's like literally one of the only positive things I could say about a Southern tendency that is really acceptable right now. And we're already set for that. So that is not gendered at all. And also think about finding ways to allow people to tell you their pronouns without them having to. So for some people, it could be a safety issue. If someone is trans, but they're living in a community where that is not, it's safe for them to disclose, if they're in a living situation where it's not safe for them to disclose, saying to someone like, what are your pronouns, is kind of like you're clocking them like, oh, you don't look cis to me. That could be dangerous for them. It could be offensive to them. It could be a problem. So something you might want to consider doing is when you're doing your intake, that could just be part of the form. Just have people put their pronouns on the form. Then if it's dangerous for that person to disclose, they don't have to. And they're not put on the spot like, oh, hey, I see you seem different. What are your pronouns? If you didn't ask the other people who you thought looked cis, even though you could do that coming from a good place, that could be very uncomfortable for the person in question. So find a way to just make it part of your intake process. Or you could, even if it's in a conversation, you can say what your pronouns are and not ask them what theirs are. But then it's out there that you are aware that not everybody's pronouns are something you can look at and just guess. And that also you care. But if it's not safe or comfortable for them to say, they don't have to say. So something to think about. Sometimes we have great intentions and they're just things because we don't have that lived experience. They're things we might not think about. So next one. Accept and request feedback. So just like at the beginning of this presentation, Dr. AJ explained, we really need feedback from people to make sure that our presentations are even better next year, that the entire conference is better. That's literally the only way any of us really make progress, is if we're receptive to criticism, which I know it almost like makes you start itching when you even hear the word criticism, to like deliberately ask someone to give you things to work on or feedback. It feels like, why in the world would I do that? But if you see it as a service, if you see it as this is an opportunity for me to grow, and if you go into it knowing that you don't have to use every little bit of feedback you get, you can look at it, see whether or not it seems valuable. Does it seem true to you? Do you really think they've highlighted a concern that you can improve or need to improve? Or is what they're saying totally subjective? And if you're not quite sure, you can, of course, run it by some trusted team members from that diverse table of decision makers you put together a couple of steps ago. And don't be afraid of the criticism. It really, for me, just you have to find a way where it's most comfortable for you to receive it. So if it's best for you to get it in writing where you don't have to worry about maybe making faces, because some of us have trouble controlling how much we display our emotions on the spot, maybe ask for written feedback. Or maybe even if it's a trusted person, let them know I'm feeling really vulnerable about this. I'm kind of worried about this and what you might say, but I know that I need to know. So, like, be gentle, like, make it as palatable as possible. Okay, so I got a hallelujah in the comments. So I'm loving that everybody's feeling that. So another thing, language matters. Now, beyond just the gendering, another issue I see all the time is when people do not even attempt to pronounce what they perceive as an ethnic name correctly. Think about how invalidating that is. Think about how important it is to people to hear their own name. Like, I've heard marketers say that someone's name is the sweetest sound in the world to them. And if you really think about how you respond to people when they say your name, when they're reaching out to you for a sale, when they're reaching out to you for feedback, or even why do you think Starbucks says everybody's name, albeit not always correctly, when they're really trying to give them the feel that, oh, you're getting personalized customer service. We value you as an individual customer here. It is very important that we do not gloss over people's names and say, like, oh, well, that's just too long for me. Oh my goodness, like, that's all consonants, or saying like, oh, your name is just so not something that would exist in my cultural group. So it's totally invalid. Why don't we just call you Sally? Why don't we just call you Sarah? That was something I know when I was in school many moons ago that people would do all the time. They would literally rename the international students and say, oh, well, this is going to be your public school name, or this is your American name now. That's not a thing. If someone chooses to do that on their own because of whatever reason, that's their business. If someone tells you, just call me ... that's fine. But you cannot be the one who says, oh, that's just too long. I'm never going to get that right. That's not acceptable. And it really is invalidating. And if it keeps happening to people when they go into healthcare settings, or when they go into settings that are dominated by people who aren't from their same cultural group, you're sending them a message that you're not welcome here. You're not even important enough for me to learn how to pronounce your name. And it's fine to make mistakes. But if you are genuinely trying, there is no name that you can't learn. Like, you can get it eventually. And I know it really depends with, there are some sounds, that don't exist in English if English is the only language you speak. And there will be some things that are really hard for us to get right. But you can get as close as humanly possible. There's just no way around it. It's another way to respect and affirm the people that you're trying to serve. And you would not believe how often I hear people tell Black American children that, their name is just, wow, why would they spell it that way? That's not how you spell it. Really? That is how they spell it. They didn't ask you. And if the reason you think it sounds funny or you think it sounds ridiculous is that it doesn't sound American enough, or it doesn't sound white American enough, can't you hear how problematic that is? Like, let it sink in. Yeah, we're not going to do that one anymore. Now, another important thing is to really determine what your values are for your program or your organization, and you need to communicate those. And then you need to reinforce them and back them up. Because if you are not making it clear to everyone that this is a space where we value inclusion. This is a space where we respect everyone. We don't care what their disability is, what their age is, what their race is, what their nationality is, what their marital status is, what their orientation is. Here, everyone is respected, and we don't use disrespectful language. And if you do, we're going to call it out, and it's going to be corrected. And either you will be open to change or you will be shown the door. This is uncomfortable, but it is so important if you are going to create a safe space for everyone. So it isn't just about checking your own behavior. It's about making sure that even other customers or other clients are not guilty of making a space hostile. And when it comes to nutrition and wellness spaces, we really have to think about ableism and understanding that you cannot see everyone's disability. If somebody tells you they need a modification, they need a modification. It isn't a debate. They don't have to prove it. And they definitely don't have to tell you what their diagnosis is. You need to make it clear at the outset that, hey, we're here for the modifications. We want for everyone to be able to participate. If you need something different, please feel free to pull me aside and let me know. Or even better, it should be in your intake forms. And you actually need to read and review those. And, if there's something that requires you to take an action, you need to have some kind of record keeping system that's going to keep that top of mind if they come in for a class or something. You don't want for someone who maybe is embarrassed about the fact that once they get down on the floor, they can't get up on their own. They shouldn't have to ask for help. If they came in and they paid for a service or their company paid for a service and they put that on the form, we need to remember, we need to honor that. We need to make sure somebody is assigned to giving them the accommodations that they need without them having to ask. Think of how embarrassing that could be for someone to continually have to ask for help when they are a grown adult who is not accustomed to having to ask for help. That may be enough for them to decide not to come back to your class or not to participate in your program anymore. The next one, welcome other people's stories and perspectives. Don't just ask for feedback every now and then. Create an atmosphere where it's safe for people to share their unique perspective. Because sometimes when you ask a question, you kind of lead the person toward giving you a specific answer or a specific type of information. When you leave it wide open, you will be amazed at the types of things that you can learn. And you want to do that with your team, and you also want to do that with your clients. Of course, you have to decide what boundaries you do need, but there is a way to make it clear that you really want for people to share any part of their lived experience that they believe affects their ability to work with you. And the last thing I really want to encourage everyone to do is to be vigilant about our bias that is seemingly harmless, that invalidates other people's food preferences and food customs and food culture. Instead of giving people a specific list of healthy foods, you can lean more toward descriptors and make it very clear that this is not an all-inclusive list. These are just types of food that I want you to consider. And ask the client to give you some examples that they are familiar with that they think seem similar. So millet isn't really something we eat a lot in the States, but millet is very common in other parts of the world. And it's a whole grain and it's perfectly valid. And it's a wonderful option when you're looking at whole grains, but you won't ever see that on a list of recommended foods in the healthy whole grain carb section at the health department. It's not listed. It's a chronic problem that our nutrition education materials at the health department, at the doctor's office, do not include cultural foods from other parts of the world. If you live in a large city, like I'm near Atlanta, there are people here from all over the world, and we have a massive international airport. And so people have access to their traditional foods all the time. It's not like where I was raised in the backwoods where we couldn't get ackee, which is a Jamaican treat. It's a whole food that we loved, but we had to either have someone literally pack it in their bag from Jamaica, or we had to wait until we went to Miami or New York to buy it in a canned form. But these days, people are still eating their traditional foods all the time. But because people trust people who are in a position of power, who are supposed to be providing healthcare services, if you fail to include any of their cultural foods, they might start to believe that their food should be on this forbidden list, that their foods are not healthy. And in a lot of cases, some of these more traditional foods are less processed and are a superior option to the foods that we have on our nutrition ed lists. Make sure your sessions are client-centered. And even if you're educating in a group setting, you can elicit interaction from your audience. Get other examples from your audience. And if they list something that you've never heard of, ask more questions about it. Ask, oh, well, how do you serve that? Where do you find it? What does it taste like? So that everyone in the room can see you modeling that not only do we want to create inclusive spaces, diversity is delicious. Diversity is wonderful, and it enriches the lives of everyone. So that's really just scratching the surface, but I hope that gives you a clear idea of what you should think about as you're trying to structure a program that really makes room for everyone. And I love that in the comments, yes, someone who willfully and intentionally and consciously shortened your name without permission, not cool. So this has happened to people. It's offensive. Just be a little more cognizant, and just remember that your way of seeing the world is not the best way. It is a way. And if people use different names in a different part of the world, yours isn't any better. That's another way to be a human being who names children on this planet. There's no one way to be a human. Let's make room for everybody.
Absolutely. That was me.
I can just imagine. It's so rude. I just see people do it so many times.
It really is one of those where I was just like, do I spend 5 minutes of my life every single time I meet someone going through this, knowing it's going to probably take them like 10 tries? Or do I just reward myself back all of that time in my life by just saying AJ? I'm going to go back.
Well, at the same time, though,
no explanation needed. But the interesting thing about that, and I was sitting here laughing as you went through that, right? So I go through all of this. I shorten my name, blah, blah, blah. And when I say AJ, even now, people go, oh, Adrian.
What? Oh, wow. Oh, you went with the shortest, easiest thing. People still hear something different.
What?
It's so funny because some of these mix-ups, it's like you don't know what's going on with the other person, because there's some people who they're just a little hard of hearing, and there's some things that they can't hear what you're saying, and they kind of hear it and then they just guess.
Yep.
And so
then I've shortened my name, and of course, like, all of a sudden when I say AJ, people are like, oh, like age A, like a J, like the bird. And I'm like,
I've never heard
J. I said
so no matter what you do, it's just
right. And it's like, what was the point of me shortening my name? Like, seriously, I'm still spending 5 minutes explaining 2 letters.
See, then maybe you should think about going back. Tell people to get with the program. Like, not everybody's name is Jane.
True. And the reason I willfully shortened my name is so my name is really ancient and sacred. And it actually, I realized as I grew up it's not other people. It's my personal thing where when somebody mispronounces my name, I don't have patience for it. Like it just rubs me the wrong way, which is very, as a coach, especially for me to admit this, it's very not understanding, but I get that. But it is my name, which is why to make it inclusive and to make it more fair, because it is not fair for me to expect everybody to pronounce my name correctly, even especially when I grew up in India. 90% of Indians pronounce my name wrong.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was like one of those things where it really, really is just a personal thing, and I was like, I'm going with AJ.
Well, what I get the most,
call me AJ, and when they call me my full name, I'm like, oh crap, I'm in trouble now.
Well, it's funny. What I get the most often over the telephone anyway is that when I say my name's Dalia, they're like, oh, nice to meet you, Valerie. I'm like, what? I don't know why people hear Valerie, but a lot of people hear Valerie. But that's not, I feel like that's different because they're not intentionally trying to be disrespectful. I don't know. They just think it sounds like Valerie.
I know. But Dalia, this was so amazing. We definitely have to continue these conversations. We're going to meet offline because you've given us so many tips and this was just so useful. And you've gone into so many things about inclusive programming and everything. We're definitely going to have you back. We're definitely going to continue these conversations because you've touched on so many points that it's almost like impossible to consolidate everything you've touched on into like, a 50-minute thing. So thank you so much for all of our listeners. Thank you for tuning in now or later. What I can tell you is that we are going to work on future programming with Dalia Kinsey, RD, LD, SNS. I just love saying that. It rolls off the tongue. So please stay tuned for those. And again, if you have questions, drop them in the comments and we'll make sure Dalia gets them. And for everybody who's tuned in live or watching this later, thank you so much for being a part of the C3EB Summit. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you tomorrow for the final day. Thank you, Dalia.
Thank you.